you see a lot of people, when you introduce them to, emotional intelligence concepts, some do very well with it, others struggle. And so I was asking why, in my mind, in my awareness. And so as I was staring at this evolution, it became pretty clear to me that there is something foundational to our IQ and our EQ. And so as I stared at it, it just sort of emerged out of this background. It was just very clear. It's our IQ. It's our awareness. It all starts with awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Everything, our entire experience in life starts and ends with awareness. If there's no awareness, there can be no perception.
Hello and welcome to episode 86 of the Living and Leading with Emotional Intelligence podcast. I'm your host, Brittney-Nichole. Thank you so much for joining us today. It is an honor and a privilege to bring you today's guest. Brian Cunningham is a friend of mine and someone who I consider to be a mentor. Brian considers himself a student of leadership in life, and he started out as a parking lot attendant at a large hospital in Philadelphia, and he has worked his way through many levels of the healthcare industry, eventually working his way to serve as the CEO of the current hospital he's at in Hawaii. Throughout this journey, Brian has purposefully studied the leadership and fellowship dynamics to understand both the illusions and deeper realities of leadership service. At one point on his journey, while immersed in seeking a more integrative approach to leadership service, the full developmental progression of growth as a leader began to emerge to Brian, which he organized into a unique and practical framework that others can use to develop their own expression of leadership mastery. The AQ model of leadership, and AQ stands for Awareness Quotient, is detailed in his book, The Leadership Revolution, because evolution takes too long. And the fundamentals of our awareness quotient are illustrated and illuminated in his groundbreaking book, Our Awareness Quotient, the missing link to extraordinary leadership in life. Brian understands the real challenges and the amazing opportunities that these complexities present to us. And he is here today to share his practical approach to taking our leadership service to the highest level. And I want to add on that, not just leadership, but our own personal lives. Because when we think of leadership, sometimes we can think of being a leader in an organization, but we can lead ourselves through many of our own challenges. So without further ado, here's my friend, Brian Cunningham. Well, I am grateful to have you on the podcast as a guest. I've been looking forward to this since our very first conversation.
Me too. Gosh, I've loved our conversations. I love your material. I've been reading some of your book amongst my piles of books, and I just appreciate where you're coming from. There's a couple similar themes in how I see things also. This slow evolution of complexity, whereby our IQ was no longer sufficient to address the challenges that we were facing, the expanding challenges, which moved us into the need to understand our emotional intelligence to help cope with this increasing complexity. And of course, it goes on and on and on from there. But there are a couple themes in your book that I really connect with.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate that. Well, Brian, as you know, the beginning of all of my podcast episodes, I ask my guests to introduce themselves personally in your own way. So if you wouldn't mind, just start by telling the listeners and viewers a little bit about yourself. Who is Brian?
Well, thanks. Thanks so much for letting me be a part of this and being part of your ongoing discussion in life. I think it's pretty simple. I consider myself a student of life, a student of leadership, I'm always looking and listening and learning and looking sort of deeper into things. I'm interested in systems theory, how things connect, how things move, the foundations of things. And I'm here to simply serve and contribute. So the driver behind everything I do is about service. It may sound, quaint or cute, but I'm really clear about that. I'm here to serve. So the expression of who I am is I do that through service. So I'm just a student. I'm always looking, learning, expressing what I'm learning, testing it, modifying it, messing some things up from time to time, right? Standing back up and moving forward. I'm just here to serve, and I'm here to contribute to the revolution, another theme in your book, this revolution of understanding and practice of leadership. So I write and I speak and I engage with other people such as yourselves to explore this thing a little deeper. But fundamentally, I'm just a student of life, a student of leadership.
I'm so grateful we were connected through June.
Mm-hmm.
I saw his post about some of the books he was reading, mm-hmm. and I just stumbled across his profile one day, and I loved what he was about. I loved that he was the heart connector, and mm-hmm. I think he also has like catalyst in his title, and that just resonated with me. And so I sent him my book, and he's just such a kind, giving human being. And I saw your book, AQ, so Awareness Quotient, was one of the books he was reading. And then in another post, he gave a few names of people I should connect with, and you were one of them. And I am so grateful that our paths connected, because I have thoroughly enjoyed connecting with you, learning from you, speaking with you, and reading your book. So that's kind of what I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into today, because people know of IQ. Most people, a lot of people, especially people listening to this podcast, are probably familiar with EQ. But no, I don't know many people who have heard of AQ. Mm-hmm. So if you wouldn't mind just kind of telling us a little bit of what is the awareness quotient and the different types of awareness, the different levels, if you will.
Got it. Great question. So again, back to your book and sort of these common themes of how we see the world. And I think the theme is common because it comes out of reality, right? If you stare at reality over time with awareness, the pattern behind reality sort of emerges to you. Mm-hmm. So you can see this evolution of society and complexity. And we can look at our response to it as individuals and society. We could see back in the olden days, right, our experience in any given field, whether it was as a farmer or, some blacksmith, whatever it was, our experience in the field was the most important element to being a leader in that field. And as you know, experience takes a long time to develop. Mm-hmm. And obviously that's a good approach to things. But as the pace continued to increase and the complexity of society continued to increase, our experience was no longer enough, right? Things were moving too fast. So then it became important to really grow and focus on our intelligence, left side of the brain, we could say, as a model. Our IQ became important. So schools and MBA programs was about gaining knowledge. Mm-hmm. That's how you became more valuable in this increasing complexity and in this increasing pace of change. And that worked for quite a while, 100 years or so. And but complexity has a funny thing, there's a momentum to it. It keeps increasing the pace, the complexity, the interconnectedness of life. And so just our experience and just our intelligence and just the information age contribution of all the data and information and best practice was no longer enough. society began to sort of come apart at the seams. And, as you know very well, in the mid 90s, Daniel Goleman comes out with this book on emotional intelligence and, shocks the world kind of thing. And all of the research behind that so much of our experience in life and our effectiveness as a leader is based really in our emotional intelligence, not just our intellectual or IQ or our past experience. Mm-hmm. And so it became very important to understand, ground ourselves in this emotional dynamic. And Daniel did, of course, a great job in sort of, laying that out for us to explore further. Very important. But an interesting thing, in those mid 90s, I was reading and studying the same stuff, playing with it and practicing. Yet over time, here goes another 10, 20 years, and the pace and complexity continues. And that, to me, my observations, was no longer enough. It's an important part, right? Experience is important. Our intellect is important. Emotional intelligence is important. But it's not enough to keep pace with the expanding complexity. You see a lot of people, when you introduce them to emotional intelligence concepts, some do very well with it, others struggle. And so I was asking why, in my mind, in my awareness. And so as I was staring at this evolution, it became pretty clear to me that there is something foundational to our IQ and our EQ. And so as I stared at it, it just sort of emerged out of this background. It was just very clear. It's our IQ. It's our awareness. It all starts with awareness. Mm-hmm. Everything, our entire experience in life starts and ends with awareness. If there's no awareness, there can be no perception of experience, of stimuli. So it's a fundamental, universal principle of life, yet it's so foundational, we often ignore it. So we're looking at this and this and this and studying all this stuff. I mean, look at all the leadership material out there. Great topics about, vulnerability and this, vision and deep listening. And this is all great stuff, but it lacks the integration we need to mm-hmm. make real use of it. So it was just like you did, Brittney. I was following this evolution of society's response to complexity and looking at the gap, the ever-increasing gap between complexity of society, right, and technology, and our ability as social beings to keep up with that expanding gap. And what I saw in the middle of it was this foundation of awareness as the fundamental source that both informs and enlivens our intelligence and our emotions. So it just sort of emerged out of the background of this work of staring at it for quite a few years, actually. And, so then I wanted to do some research on it. And so I looked it up, AQ, awareness quotient. It seemed obvious, but there was nothing really out there. There were no books there. And I thought, wow, that's strange. So I just started to explore it more deeply and understand it and play with it and write about it, understand what it's made up of. And that's how the model, the experiential model came together that I've been sharing through a couple books that I've written and posted on LinkedIn.
Yeah. And, I think that was the moment when things started to shift for me, was when I became self-aware. Because like you said, emotional intelligence is very powerful.
Yes.
But you cannot fully experience that power without that level of awareness. And that's why self-awareness is the foundation of emotional intelligence.
Yes.
And with awareness, I think it's all about being that objective observer. Because as soon as you start trying to put your own spin on things, then you may miss things, because then you're selective with your awareness. So you're talking about, in your book, you talk about the internal awareness, external, integrative, And then the last one I want to say is expansion, or I'm blanking on that one. What is after integrative?
It's the depth and clarity of our awareness of the deeper purpose of life itself.
Yes, yes,
You know, this
yes.
is that foundation of our being and doing. Some
Yeah.
people may call that, you know, SQ, spiritual quotient.
Mm.
Um,
I think I'm right on the verge of, so I'm in the integrative part right now, I think, for myself.
you
And
know,
my goal is the SQ.
well, yeah, you know, and all of them at the same time. You know, you bring up a very important point in the emotional intelligence work. Obviously, it talks about self-awareness. And many times you'll see this, you know, definition, you know, self-awareness is knowing your strengths and weaknesses, and it'll go on like that. And I would say, yeah, of course, yes. But that's just scratching the
Oh, yeah.
surface.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
I don't even, I rarely use the term self-awareness. I prefer the term awareness because it's big. It's really
Mhm.
big. So that was my exploration to understand what awareness functionally is made up of, how it expresses itself. And so you brought it up. It expresses itself through the depth and clarity of our perception of our internal environment. And this is, you know, this is a whole exploration in and of itself, right? And this starts to get into our sort of core beliefs, our core programming. You know,
Mhm.
where did that come from? How did that get there? What contributes to that? And out of that core programming, that core beliefs system, the thoughts and feelings that come out of that, which then trigger many of the emotions that we're
Mhm.
talking about. And then, of course, from there, this cascade of chemicals through our body and then resultant behaviors.
Mhm.
So, if we're trying to impact behaviors, sometimes people will say, well, just stop doing that, right? It's like, oh, okay, great advice, you
Yeah.
know, but we need to get underneath that to the emotions that drive that. And so
Mhm.
we do emotional intelligence work, very important. But what drives emotions? These thoughts and feelings, what drives those? And then we
Yeah.
have to go all the way back to these core beliefs. What structures these? This sort of nature, nurture kind of thing, all of the programming received, and even our genetic makeup, our karmic makeup, what we bring into this lifetime. It's all in there. So just the internal environment in and of itself is a lifetime of study, right?
Yeah.
So we study these things, we explore them concurrently. So it's important to understand experientially internal environment. And then there's this whole other world out there, right? It's connected, but you know, to break it up so that we can understand it, there's this whole world out there. All these other people, they have their own thing going on too.
Mhm.
We have many commonalities as human beings, but everybody's got their own thing going on. So we need to be able to look out and understand that. What are the beliefs and thoughts and feelings and emotions that are driving their behaviors? And look at them from the same perspective as our own exploration. As you know, as we look inside, it's like, wow, you know, I'm pretty jacked up when I look, you know, when you start to try to break this apart and you start to sort of heal that stuff.
Mhm.
But it's not just people out there, there's objects and things and nature and the cosmos. And very importantly, all of the social constructs that have built up over time, right? These, these human designed structures that dictate much of our lives, you know, religion and education and government and culture. And, you know, these are sort of human designed systems. And if we don't understand them from the level of awareness, we get hooked by them. We are either fighting them or joining them. You know, I'm joining this cause, I'm fighting against that cause, right? These social constructs that sort of run our lives in that way. And through deeper levels of awareness of all of this, we can move through life with much more ease and grace when we understand what they're really made up of.
Mhm.
So there's levels to this awareness. We can see it. Okay, that's one level. How deep can we understand it?
Yeah.
The next domain, though, this is important. We could sit in a cave, right? and really understand our internal environment and, at a very high level, meditate for 20 years. We can also spend a lot of time looking out at the world to understand that. Many people do. Very insightful about external environment. We're very insightful about the internal environment. But without the integration of the two, right, this is the dance with life. Some people are very attuned to what's going on in here, but can't really move through life in a graceful way. There's still this little friction or fighting or struggle.
Yeah.
Right? Or some people are very clear about what's happening out there and are always trying to please, whatever's going on out there and align with that. So when we're clear about who we are and we're clear about what's going on out there, we can begin to explore how we dance with this world, where they overlap and intersect, right? Because it's all connected. And how we play in this space to move with other humans and the environment and nature.
Yeah.
And how we walk through with whatever culture we find ourselves in, to be in it but not of it, to not be hooked by it, to be detached from it, so that we can truly, truly, express who we are and why we're here. Without this, very, very important, the external environment. When we do our internal explorations, we give ourselves a lot of leeway. We see this, we see that, we explore this, we explore that. But the external environment's not as forgiving, right? If you step out against what's going on in the external environment, how does that work? We see that happening now.
Yeah.
Everybody attacking each other.
Yeah.
So this third element, the integration of internal and external, allows us to move through that, with grace and ease, so that we don't become at the effect of it, the external environment, just because we understand it so well now. And of course, the fourth element is, again, a foundational element of our being, is that depth of perception, clarity of perception of, that fundamental source of our being and doing. And this is where we connect very deeply in awareness. It's the experiences can be explored from a religious perspective or a spiritual perspective or a philosophical perspective or an indigenous cultures perspective, philosophical perspective. Even pure science, quantum physics talks about, this wild stuff that's going on.
Yeah.
The experience, though, brings us into that interface between the field of consciousness. We could use that term. Everything, right? The whole universe of creation and sustainability of everything.
Yeah.
The interface of the field of consciousness with our individuated awareness. We are part of the field of consciousness through, and we experience it and perceive it through our individuated awareness, right? My individuated awareness and your individuated awareness. We're all connected through this overlap between the field of consciousness and our individuated awareness. So as we get down, or more expanded into this, our exploration of life is informed and enlivened by this. And again, people may call it religious or spiritual or whatever. It's there for everybody. It doesn't care what we call it.
Right.
So that's what, in my exploration, as I sat with awareness and stared at awareness, this is what came forward. Oh, okay, yeah. Much like there's 4 domains of EQ, somewhat similar, but again, it's at the foundation of awareness. So we can work on them separately or all at the same time,
Right. There are a few things that you touched on that I want to expand upon.
Sure.
The first thing that comes to mind is you're talking about the internal self, being aware of that, but also the external. And I was listening to an interview one day, and I can't remember the person, but they said it beautifully. I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So they said, one person who is experiencing stress in their life, they have anxiety, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when a society has that trauma, when you take all these individuals who have a collective trauma, we call that social discord. It was something along those lines, right? And it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
You know, we come together and we have all these social issues, but behind the social issues are individuals
Yes.
that make up that. And so that's
Yes.
why instead of focusing so much on fixing society, if we just focus, and we say this all the time, people are always saying, focus on yourself and you'll fix everything else. But I guess people think that's easier said than done, or they think, or they're completely unaware that they need fixing. They say, well, nothing's wrong with me. It's
Yeah.
you. It's where that ego kind of is trying to protect us from ourselves, I'm assuming, because it's really difficult to see the dark side in ourselves, because that's the way we see it, as a dark side. We don't see it as unmet needs or unaddressed trauma and emotions, the source of all of this, because we've been taught to judge. We've been taught that this is what's acceptable, this is what isn't acceptable. And the things that aren't acceptable are labeled as bad, wrong, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we don't want to be bad or wrong. People don't like bad or wrong. So we just dismiss it and focus on what we're good at, or give ourselves the illusion of there's nothing there, we're perfectly fine.
Right.
That's what's got to break down, I believe, before we can reach that. That's what held me back for the longest time. And I wish I knew what that transition period was. Obviously, self-compassion was involved in that. But something clicked in me to say, you're not your behaviors. But we so frequently, and I believe I've talked about this, maybe it was the episode with Claude, but we put the adjective in front of the individual, right? That's a angry individual. That's a bad person. No, it's a person who's exhibiting toxic behaviors potentially, right?
Yes. So let's talk about you. That's the other key point. There's two key points I'd like to talk about,
Sure.
and you brought up both of them. One is that we understand the foundation of our being and doing in the world, and that comes through our awareness. And when we work from the foundation and build a strong foundation, the other elements of our life tend to come into alignment.
Mm.
But even awareness is not enough, right? We have to apply it. So, we can be sitting there, all kinds of awareness, we're levitating, all this great stuff. But that's not enough. That doesn't serve the world, to the degree that we are here with our purpose and our vision. So we need to then apply our awareness in the messiness of life, in the reality of life, right? It's easy to write books about, you just become enlightened and then everything. Well, no. If you're living in the world and serving others, there's a messiness to it. Mm-hmm. And we need to understand that messiness. And we need to understand the transition that you just spoke of. This is the other key piece of the puzzle. So I would say it this way. Everything in life, every living, growing system moves along a natural developmental progression. So we know this intuitively, right? When a child has to crawl before they walk, and walk before they run, and run before they jump. You've been to a few years of school, right? You can't go from kindergarten to college and masters and PhD level work. There's a developmental progression. Every sport, every hobby has a developmental progression. And so if you join anything, a hobby, a sport, you will be taught some version of the developmental progression to build your skills to be able to perform in that way. Mm-hmm. So the developmental progression is well known everywhere. accept leadership. In leadership, there is no awareness of the thing that drives everything else. And that's why we have books about this and this and this and this and this. And then you read them all. I would read and I go, wow, that was great. Wow, that was great. Wow, that was great. Wow. But how do you put them all together?
Yeah.
Into an integrated plan that moves you sort of consistently forward. So as I was staring at this leadership conundrum question and why things weren't moving forward, they're the two things that stood out. Awareness. It all starts and ends with awareness. And everything in between is a function of our AQ, our awareness quotient. And as we apply that to leadership, we see the whole developmental progression. We can see it. We are living it. And so many people, without even knowing it, will find themselves, expressing leadership or their, heart-centered approach to service at a very high level. And you wonder, like, wow, how'd they do that? And then maybe you read their book and it just says, well, just do this, just be heart-centered and care for people and be compassionate. And so everybody reads this, 1,000 people read it. How many people can actually do it?
Right.
So is it because I'm, I could do it? Is it because I'm smarter or better than somebody else? That's not the answer. For whatever reason, I've done this preparation, you've done that preparation. So we've moved along maybe without awareness of it, but we've done our work. So if you talk about servant leadership, mm-hmm. as it unfolded to me, this developmental progression of leadership, which is, it's not, if I could say this, it's not an arbitrary model. Sometimes people get a bunch of concepts and smash it together in, a model or a triangle or something. Mm-hmm. And it's not that. It came out of the same observations that you were having, that I was having, of the evolution of society, right? From the industrial age, which predominant leadership characteristic was authoritarian leadership, mm-hmm. right? Based on my experience. Mm-hmm. As the information age started to come along, we moved into IQ, right? Data, information, best practice, okay? And the leadership model that came out of that was evidence-based leadership. As complexity continued, we integrated the right side of our brain, holistic mind, left and right side, creativity. And that comes out of the knowledge age. Industrial age, information age leads to the knowledge age, which is the right use of data and information. But of course, as complexity increased, that was no longer enough. We needed more. Something was missing, and Daniel Goleman hit on it. It was our heart. So level 4 comes out of information age, knowledge age, understanding age. Understanding is the connection of our mind and our heart. This is what creates transformational leadership, mm-hmm. and transformational experiences for others. We can change things at level 3 with our mind. But in order to transform something, we need to first connect our mind with our heart so that we can connect with the minds and hearts of others. Change makes things different, while transformation makes us different. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Level 4, transformational leadership. But, right, we're continuing to expand. Industrial age leads to information age, which leads to knowledge age, the understanding age, to the wisdom age, out of which comes servant leadership. This is my circuitous discussion about servant leadership. Wisdom age is the right use of everything that came before it, and the direct vision of the long arc of cause and effect over time, so that we can create more sustainable results for people over time, as opposed to the quick fixes. That's one element of wisdom, yes. And that's how we really serve. Yeah. And it keeps going on from there, right, to transcendental leadership and mystic and awakened and integrated and unified leadership. But let me just stay here at level 5. So you read Robert Greenleaf's book about servant leadership. Talks about it, what it's made up of, how to do it, level 5. But if you are stuck at level 1, rarely are you able to make that jump to level 5. And that is why we see all these great books out there And some people can jump right on it,
Mm-hmm.
those that are ready. But if
Right.
you're stuck at level one, it is very difficult to make that leap. And so without an understanding of the developmental progression, how to move people along this journey to get to servant
Mm-hmm.
leadership, we won't be able to make that jump. So we do this in every sport, in every hobby, in education. And when we understand its impact on leadership and life, let me say this: the developmental progression of leadership is the same as the developmental progression of our lives as a human being. There is no separation
Right.
between
Exactly.
who we are as a leader and who we are as a human being. So if we stare at the developmental progression of our growth in awareness as a human being, we see this same progression.
Yeah.
And that's how we know it's not just an arbitrary model of, concepts. It is a reflection of reality.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing when we talk about transitions. How did we get here? When we understand the developmental progression and where it comes from and what holds us stuck at each level, how to move beyond that, right? We can take the evolutionary approach to moving forward, the long evolutionary approach, and that works. Or we could take, and I see it in your writings also, a revolutionary approach. There's a revolution going on, a revolution of understanding and practice.
Yeah.
Then we can expedite that journey along the expanded levels of awareness, which are aligned with the expanded levels of leadership. And that's how we can move. If somebody's telling us about heart-centered leadership, servant leadership, and I'm stuck down here, if you understand the developmental progression experientially, now you're in a position to meet people where they are and help them step by step explore and experience each level of the progression and to create their own pathway into higher levels of leadership. So the two elements are awareness, clarity of awareness, and an understanding of the natural developmental progression.
You know what that made me think of as you're talking through this? It made me think of, and I want to get your opinion on this too, but let me get this out before I forget it because I'm very forgetful these days. Whenever I was in school and I wasn't grasping a concept or understanding something, but I knew that I needed to pass that class or pass that grade, I would rely heavily on my friends to help me with those answers. Can you give me the answer? Just tell me what I need to do so I can pass this class and move on to the next level.
Yeah.
And then when you get to that next grade level, it's much more challenging because you're building on top of what you should have learned. But if you didn't understand it and actually work through those problems yourself, if you don't have that true understanding, you can't apply it. So then you're reliant yet again on someone else to tell you what you need to do. And I think that same thing is true in leadership. Everybody's wanting to progress, but not always wanting to do the work to get there, which makes them either a poor student or a poor leader.
Yes.
And reliant on the quick fixes that are not going to hold true whenever they're tested. Right? And I don't know if it's that, using the whole concept of students in school, did it stem from that progression of you need to go here, here, here? And so we're so focused on being at the right place in our lives that we forget the whole purpose is the process. And so the ego is so, what is the word? What is the word I'm looking for? Like we put our ego on a pedestal almost. And that's what we're focused on. And so the ego thrives on accomplishments and justification and validation and all of these things that's kind of what we're looking for. And the way that we get these labels, these validations, these trophies, these accolades, is by showing that we can level up.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not focused on how to level up, the process of leveling up, you know.
I think that's a beautiful analogy. And as people level up, it's on a shaky foundation. And as you just said, then when the real challenges hit, right, everybody's a great leader when there's no challenge. Everybody's a great human being, right? Because it's all connected. The analogy that you used around school can be, reflected in society, in the workplace, right?
Yeah.
Everywhere, government, everywhere. It's the same issue that you brought up.
Yeah.
Because people aren't either aware of the work, don't want to take the time. Life is hard, right? There's a lot of pressure to it. And I would even say this, on our unique individual journeys as humans, we come in at different stages of development. We are very similar as human beings, and we're all equal on that level. But we are clearly at different stages of growth in different areas. You may be further along in one area, I may be further along in another area, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we are not the same from that perspective. And that's part of the challenge. Everybody, well, we're all the same. We all have the same choices. Well, that's not true. That's not true functionally. Even though we all may have the same choice intellectually, right? I can eat this or that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do I have access to that choice? Not everybody has access to the same choices. Access comes through deep awareness of the impact and subtlety of all of our choices. So knowing about a choice isn't the same as having access to it. So we're not the same from that level. Excuse me. And when we recognize this, that positions us to serve and support others better and to be able to see what's really going on. When we look at, politics, for example, and the constant fight there, right? Want to talk about level 1 and level 2? Level 1, the primary driver of level 1 is the need to control others, authoritarian leadership, must control. That's how I express my power. That's how I calm the fears that I have, my ego.
Yeah.
Okay. Then we expand a little more along into the information age, but we're still very connected to level 1, right? And that is level 2, information age, evidence-based leadership, left brain, and the need to be right. So that's how I express my power. I must prove to you that I am right. That's how I control you. That's how I dominate you, through my rightness. So we have level 1, the need to control others. And the flip side of that is, and no one controls me, right? You can't tell me what to do, doesn't matter what it is. I refuse to be controlled and I must control you. That's the battle at level 1. Level 2 is about being right. So if we look at politics, right, you see two groups, you can guess which one is which. One must be in control and will do anything to maintain control, and the other one must be right and will do anything to maintain their rightness. And they're both just a subtle variation in the need to dominate others. So they're very closely related. And so we can see these levels of leadership aren't just some abstract principle. We watch it play out every day. It plays out in families. It plays out in workplaces. It plays out in politics, education, right? But what you see, the predominant levels of awareness are stuck in or moving through level 1 and level 2. That's the status quo of leadership on the planet. Now, there are many leaders, obviously, have moved far beyond that. Even back in the industrial age, there were some amazing leaders. There always have been. But the predominant societal, the point you were bringing up, society seems to be stuck in, and they're not really stuck. They are moving through it. But it takes a long time to get through level 1 awareness, which expresses itself as level 1 leadership or level 1 patriarchy, right?
Right.
I must control you because I'm a man. The whole scene is tied into authoritarian leadership. So the process is our growth as human beings, as individuals, and in mass. And just observationally, many people are still doing the work of level 1 and 2, just like you did, just like I did, just like we are still doing.
Mm-hmm.
From that perspective, we are all equal, right? We're all doing the same work, having to work through the same things. So we can look at people stuck in level 1 and 2, not even, well, with empathy, and of course, in recognition, in connection with that. I know level 1 very well. I've done it for many years. I still feel the pull of it when my ego starts going, yeah, you need to be in control, you need to be right,
Yeah.
So when we understand these things, these transitions, and we can see them play out in our own lives, out in society, we go, oh, okay. As you just said, all of a sudden I got it. Oh, it's time to move forward. It's time to move on. In your developmental journey, in your unfolding, flowers unfold, humans unfold, everything unfolds. You were ready for that next step and you took it. Somebody else wasn't ready. Not because you were better or smarter than them, or I was better or smarter. They just hadn't got to that place in the journey yet.
Yeah.
That's all.
When you're talking about this progression in life of having control, then wanting to be right, and moving through this, it really makes me think about those levels in my life and where I was and when I was there. And, I saw it, especially when I was a child. I was an only child and I never had to share, right? But I remember when my friends would come over talking about control, I controlled people probably until I was in my early 20s. I had that control component. And I would create an itinerary when I was a young child for my friends. Like, this is what we're going to do from this time to this time. Then we're going to do this. Then we're going to have snack. Then we're going to play with this.
Yep.
And it went that way. And if they didn't like that, then I would get upset, because it's like, no, you're coming over to play with me. This is what we're going to be doing. These are the toys you can play with. These are the ones you can't touch. These are mine. These are off limits. Control, control. Same thing with my relationships. I want to spend time with you during this part of the day. This is what we're going to do. I don't want you talking to this person. I don't like that person. So if you talk to that person, I'm going to break up with you. Control. Yeah. And then when I started to go through my self-development journey, I started to learn about mindfulness and awareness, yada, yada, yada. But then I became right. This way is wrong. This way is right. I know because I'm doing the work. I'm right. So I see that now. Looking back, it's very interesting, because you're right. It is that progression.
It's just reality.
Yeah.
And you've gone through it. I go through it. And the next level, right? The knowledge age, the integration, is coaching leadership is the outcome. This is where we take information, knowledge, and experience and modify it and adapt it to meet our specific needs in a specific organization or in our specific lives. Now we're starting to make use of data and information. This is the beginning of the extricating ourselves from the status quo. And our empowerment comes through empowering others and bringing others in, team, a coaching leadership. It's a team. Life becomes a team sport. It's no longer about our independence. It is about our interdependence. And we live and grow through others. So this is the start of working with other human beings on a shared vision. And of course, as we were talking earlier, and we then connect with our heart. And oh my gosh, talk about feeling the connection between human beings and honoring others and seeing the magnificence of everyone and the perfection, no matter where they're at on their journey. Yeah. And when you lead from that or serve from that, that's a whole different experience.
Right, without judgment.
Oh, yeah. There can be none at that point. Right. We are connected, right? We're the same. We see and feel each other in a very real level. And modern physics tells us this. There is no separation. So level 4 is the beginning of that experience. And you are obviously, progressing in that direction also, and have had those experiences also.
I don't know if we had this conversation before, but I've heard about it multiple times now. We talk about universal consciousness. You and I have talked about that, how we're all connected. But there's been studies that like you said, show this. There's data behind this. But the mice, did we talk about the mice or the rats, the lab rats?
Let's talk about rats
Okay.
and mice.
So I don't know I'm not familiar with the study. This is through another source, but I've heard this study brought up several times. But in one country, in one lab, they started teaching these mice how to do this trick. And they couldn't get them to do it for the longest time. And then finally, the mice started to catch on. Then in other labs, after this happened around the world, these mice started to do this thing. And it's not just with mice. Like, you look at athletes. If you look at gymnasts or basketball, I mean, any sport you can think of, things that used to be impossible are now the norm. Once it's been done, it starts to happen everywhere. Because it's like going back to this universal consciousness of, I've mastered this now. Now other people can more easily do it. And so the beauty of that is, as more people become enlightened and aware, then hopefully it spreads like wildfire, because it starts to become part of that bigger awakening, if you will.
Yeah. That's just amazing work, right? The mice that used to be one of the original studies was the 100th monkey syndrome. They were doing similar experiences with monkeys, and once a certain amount of them had this skill, it started to spread, seemingly disconnected from the entire planet.
Yeah.
And you start to see this expansion of awareness and this connection across,
Isn't that kind of similar to herd immunity? Or no? I don't know how that works exactly, but it sounds kind of along those lines.
Herd immunity is sort of injected into a process. That's a little bit different.
It's different. Okay.
This is about, I think where you're going with this is our shared consciousness.
Right.
Ability to tap into. And the fact that we are all expanding over time, this is the developmental progression. The universe, awareness, is pulling us along into more expanded levels of expression. And all this stuff is connected, and it shows up in very interesting ways, like mice, like monkeys, like humans, right? There's the tipping point, another book that came out a while back, when so many people start doing this or that, others catch on.
Right.
The interesting thing is, if you look at history, there is a generally upward trajectory of expanding awareness. But at the same time, in any given time period, like right now, there's still wars and famine and killing and just horrific things going on all the time in every age. They get a little bit more sophisticated in every age because we have better technology to do really good things and, of course, really evil things. So that's also an interesting thing to observe, that some people will say, like, COVID came, and now the good thing is everybody's going to get it now. All of a sudden, everybody's going to wake up, and this is the tipping point, and all this massive enlightenment of society will happen. And, that would be great. That'd be really cool. But our history does not dictate that that's what happens. Yes, there can be an age of enlightenment where people wake up to a degree from a series of circumstances. But the human mind's an interesting thing. It forgets really easily, very quickly, right? It can forget in a day or a week or a month or a year. Yep. And then a generation moves on, and a generation dies off, and you see society having to relearn the same lessons over and over. People say, well, that's why history's important, so we can learn from it. Well, I don't know that people learn from reading about history in a book. History's our learning is an experiential thing. So it's interesting to watch society going through the same learning lessons in each generation. While there is, I think, a genuinely and upward trajectory over time.
Yeah.
So this is slow. It's slow. Now, individuals in any age can expand awareness to, the nth degree. Their history is filled with individuals, and the present is filled with individuals. But masses of society and the controlling factors of society, like government, like education, really influence people's understanding and expression of reality, and contribute to people being stuck in level 1, level 2, must be in control, must be right, and the battle that ensues incessantly after that.
It's just like shaving off just a little bit of that massive, like peeling an apple, you're always going to be shedding a little bit of that toxicity each time it revolves, but it's still going to be there until it's went through all the cycles. Yeah.
And that's why we're here, right? If you look at it, the planet, that's why we're all here. Everybody's learning and growing. Mm-hmm. So this thing about we're all going to become enlightened and everybody's going to get it because of COVID or something else. Well, again, that'd be awesome. That'd be great. But it's, I don't see that happening. My awareness doesn't inform me in that way. My awareness shows me reality, the reality of who we are and why we're here, and that we're all different. What would be the value in somebody who's at level 1 all of a sudden jump into level 10, right? Somebody in kindergarten already, jumping to PhD work. Yeah. You said it earlier, it's the process. Mm-hmm. So we are here to go through our individual and societal and connected processes.
Right.
And that's it.
And people can progress through that cycle faster than others, right? There's ways to kind of accelerate your growth.
Yes.
You still have to go through it. And usually the faster you go through it, the more painful it is sometimes.
Sometimes, yes. Yes.
Right? No pain, no gain sometimes, right?
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
And that's where, when we have enough awareness and have the ability to choose, as opposed to evolution pulling us along, right, the slow road, we can expedite that through our awareness and choice. And that's where many of us, you obviously are out there serving and supporting others who are ready to expedite themselves through that process.
Yeah.
That's why you're here, right?
And you're here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. This has been great. So how can people connect with you, Brian? How can people find you? And please, I know you've written 2 books. I am well familiar with your awareness quotient. I have that one. But your other one, and for some reason it's like evolutionary leadership is what I'm thinking of, but I can't remember the title.
That one's called The Leadership Revolution.
Revolution, okay.
Because evolution takes too long.
Yes,
that's the title. And that's the one that outlines the first book, talks about the AQ model of leadership, but I really wanted to focus on the natural developmental progression. Mm-hmm. So that book talks about the real foundation of leadership, the real meaning of leadership, and then walks people through all 10 levels of our developmental progression of leadership. And the second one, I wanted to dive deeper into the awareness quotient. So that one's mostly about our AQ. But you can get a hold of me. I'm on LinkedIn. That's, like you, we're all very busy, and, I, of course, work and serve and have family, but I do get a little time on the weekends. I post usually an article a week, a little mini post really on LinkedIn, and I'm on LinkedIn. Connect with me there. We can exchange. I met June Chang, right? Same way, and that's how I met you.
Yeah.
And so there's people out there. June's a human catalyst, connecting other humans.
Yeah.
And so we get to connect with each other and kick it around and help each other grow. Yeah. And so that's the best way to get a hold of me. And my books are available, obviously, if people want to read a little bit more and understand.
And before we finish, I would love for you to share your own personal revolution/evolution, not just personally, but in your work. Because when you and I connected, you told me that you started by, you were doing valet, right, at the hospital.
Parking lot attendant. Yes.
Parking lot attendant. But now your title is?
I'm the CEO of a hospital
Yeah.
now. So I've worked at
So you
every
went,
level.
yeah, I would love for you to share that because it just shows how you can progress like that evolution. I mean, would you call that an evolution in work, but a revolution in self? Would that
I
be fair
like
to
that.
say?
Yeah, that was a developmental progression. The characteristic that helped me along that journey from parking lot attendant to CEO was I had already started my personal growth work at that time also. So I was a
Mhm.
parking lot attendant, in this large hospital in Philadelphia, but I was trying to wake up, I was an awakening parking lot attendant. So I was applying my awareness to parking cars or whatever I was doing. And so at each level, I got a big promotion later on. I was an elevator operator after that, so I was going up and down and but not sideways, just up and down. So it's the application of awareness every step of the way that helped me to to understand each role, to understand what each role was connected to, which further opened me up to this desire to serve others. That's really the underlying, driver of this progression. It was always about serving more people. I could serve one family in the parking lot. I could serve a group of people going up and down in the elevator. So as I got into and got excited about serving each other in leadership roles, I moved into, I was a nuclear medicine tech and an occupational therapist for many years before moving into rehab director and other leadership roles, operations leadership. But it was about, if I do that, I can serve more people. How can I serve more? I was in a conversation with our hospital CEO at the time, years ago. I think I was a rehab director at the time. And I was talking about service and how, I'm just very clear. That's what I'm here to do. And he said, his name was John. John said, well, in my role, I get to serve a lot of people. So I was the rehab director in this hospital. I said, well, then I want your job. And he said, oh, okay, let me help you get there. Let me tell you what you need to do. Got to go back to school again, do all that stuff. But it was service, serving more people that has pulled me along. That's why I write. That's why I share on LinkedIn like you do, so that I can be part of the larger conversation and contribute to everyone's growth.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
that was the developmental progression there.
I love that. And that just ties into what you said before, that it's not just about being aware of yourself and developing yourself, that it gets messy. You have to, if you really want to serve, you have to expand that to other people.
Yeah.
And instead of just keeping, it's almost like, and it doesn't have to be religious, but I love this, like, and I never understood it until kind of now, but don't hide your candle. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
the It was like a song we used to sing in Bible school,
Mm-hmm.
um, let your light shine.
Yeah.
And in order to shine, you have to come out so other people can see it, and so your light can shine and affect others and light their way.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about lighting your own path.
Yeah. There's a great quote out there you've probably seen by Marianne Williamson in Return to Love in her book. And she talks, it's a big quote, paragraph, but one of the lines in there, our playing small in the world serves no one.
Yeah.
Right? Now, we may go through periods of time where we're doing our inner
Right.
explorations,
Oh, of course.
where it's time to just, be focused internally, but eventually, along the developmental progression, we will find ourselves responding to that fundamental impulse to serve others.
It's like a pulse. It's like it contracts and
Yes,
expands. You have to go
yes,
in to go
yes,
out. And then you
yes,
take what you've learned from the outside to bring it in and
yes,
reflect. It's a
yes.
constant.
The pulse of service.
Yeah. There you go. The heartbeat of the
Yes,
world.
of service. Yes, of the world.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much, Brian.
God,
It has been a pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Pleasure.
what a
Yeah.
wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for what you're doing out there. The EQ deficiency,
Likewise.
your work is just amazing. So thank you.
Likewise. Thank you so much.